Mark Vanderwall, what's going on, my reefing brother?
Happy midway of the week. Man, this is a
Yeah,
long
we're
week for
halfway
me.
there.
Even though we had
I do
Monday off.
most I do most of my work in the first 3 days of the week, and then it's just Thursday and Friday is kind of like the work I want to do for sure.
Oh, that's good. We had a bunch of outages at my work that weren't caused by us, but caused by vendors we work with. And so I got called at 2 a.m. And then at the end of the day, when it was like quitting time, something else broke. And you're like, oh, you got to be kidding me, man. I'm so ready for this day to be done. So, but it is what
I
it
feel
is.
you. No,
So,
having Monday off was good. Memorial Day off. But last week we had our European editor, Jeremy Gay, went out to Interzoo.
yeah.
And so it was cool to actually take a little trip on Sunday and come back to a bunch of stories.
Where'd you go this weekend?
I went to New York
Oh, did you?
for one day. I was 8 hours on a plane and 8 hours on the ground. I went to Mount Kisco, New York, with a local friend of mine, Sumair Tiwari. And he's currently saltwater curious, but mostly like a really good diehard freshwater aquarist.
Yeah.
And we went out there on a special mission to acquire some very, very fancy plecos.
Nice.
I've been playing freshwater a lot lately because my reef tanks are just so banging. I'm going to get into that a little bit. But you're familiar with the zebra pleco, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a version of the zebra pleco. A lot of the plecos from the Rio Xingu in Brazil have not really been identified or described.
Mm-hmm.
And so German communities, by and large, they started numbering plecos with L numbers because they're part of the lower Caridae family. And so this pleco is called L173, and I believe it's just a natural population of hybrids between zebra plecos and something else. And it's very similar to the syngamions that we see with like the orange face angelfish, the scribbled angelfish, the blue line angelfish, and like the blue phantom that Poma Labs is offering, right? So there's a similar situation happening with these freshwater plecos, and these variants of the zebra plecos are like uber rare, definitely almost like Ballina angelfish territory, except that you can spawn them. So we picked up some youngsters, we picked up the breeding group, and it was just really awesome. We carried them through security, 6 bags, 6 bags of fish. I think there was like 40 fish across 6 bags. And it was just, it sounded a lot worse. I mean, I trained all last week to go to bed early and wake up early because I had to get up at like 3 a.m. to leave here at 4 to catch my flight at 6, get to New York, get to rent a car, drive to Mount Kisco, meet this guy for the first time ever, see his fish, negotiate what's going to happen. Then we bag up all the fish for, a medium length journey.
Yeah.
And then got him through TSA. I was 50-50 on whether we were going to get through with that many fish. But TSA does have some provisions for carrying things on. So if you have corals, you just have to have a resealable container so they can open it and just kind of waft over it. And this is what I do sometimes when I carry corals home. But this time they were fish and they were in bags. So we could have opened them up and reclosed them because I had a bunch of rubber bands. But we got through just fine because the fish are swimming around. They could see that it's, living water. It's not a crazy chemical.
Yeah.
And then definitely hat tip to Southwest. That was a really great experience. No delays and got home on time, and that was great. And, I've been working on my new freshwater aquarium display. It's nice to have something else to work on while the reef tanks are just growing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? Because this is a hobby and we like to do stuff from fragging corals to curating them to moving stuff around to changing your equipment. And it's nice to just reach a kind of a plateau with the saltwater aquariums to be like, all right, well, I'm going to go focus on the freshwater tanks now. But that being said, last week I did salt up the 400-gallon aquarium and just now start to make plans to put some corals in it. very excited. My whole goal this entire time since you told me you were, coming back to town, I was like, I have to have one coral in that tank. One coral in that
Proof of
tank.
life.
So I'm going to find a token coral. Yes, a proof of life. That is a great saying. I have to find one coral to put in there. It's going to be clean of parasites. I don't really have any. And clean of reef pests. I'm really just want to go out of my way to set this tank up from scratch without any piece of live rock. Let the bacteria do their thing, but I feel like the only way to introduce that bacteria is going to be to add first a living coral. So they had 3 primes on it. I took 1 prime off and replaced it with one of the Hydra 64s that I took off the tank that I put the radions on. So yeah, that tank is ready. Although it was crystal clear with fresh water for a long time, and then we salted it up. I'm like, it's not as clear as it was. So I almost feel like putting a skimmer on there, even though there's like no biology and there's there's nothing happening in that tank, right? It's soaked for like the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I got the new freshwater display, the new 400-gallon display. And, my acros are coming out of the water on the coral tables. So it's time. It's almost like the urgency of, okay, it's time to get these colonies out and put them into a larger tank where I can really see them. Because right now they're in coral tables. So if I really want to see them, I got to turn the flow off, and it's like a ritual to turn the flow off and adjust the lighting as needed and be like, oh yeah, the corals are doing pretty good.
Nice. Yeah. I'm looking forward to, was I there? Yeah, I was there last year, right? Last summer.
Yeah.
So, that'll be a big change. Plus, I'm looking forward to seeing what you're doing with the freshwater space, just because I love freshwater fish equally as much. It's funny that you mentioned you were in New York, because I'm going to New York next week, but not for fun reasons, more for work. But I was trying to figure out something in the evenings I could do that was fish related, but I don't know. Probably get out of the office too late to have anything be open or anywhere to go. So I'll just be
right
online.
Before we started recording, we were talking about your upcoming appearance with Reef Bum, which should be live by the time most people
I'm doing that tomorrow
catch
night.
this podcast or watch this video. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
And you were talking about how you're not an SPS person anymore, and I'm like, man, I know that's still in your DNA. You're just taking a pause, however long.
Well,
You're still an acronut. I know it. I know this about you.
What I'm not doing is SBS dominant, where 90% of your coral are SBS, right? So I mean, I have 3 acroporas, 2 montiporas in my tank, but they're just another coral, like every other coral. You know what I mean? Like they're not the center of attention. They're just another plant in the garden, So, and I don't know. I mean, the 225 that I set up on my 40th birthday, that was my birthday gift to myself with permission, from my wife to spend the money. That was the biggest tank I ever set up. And I was limited in space because of the unfinished basement below. I only felt comfortable supporting that floor only so far, right? So a 225 was sort of the max I was willing to do. And then I threw it full of SBS, and then the SBS start to get big, and then it's like, okay, I don't know. It's just our acroporas, when they're growing into large colonies, are beautiful, but then you're hacking them back because they're growing into each other. I just found them less interesting. So yeah. So I told Keith, I'm a recovering SBS addict. I'm in recovery.
Is there such a thing? See, I don't believe that. I just don't believe that. I just feel like you're such an SPS nut that you're like denying yourself. I do understand going through phases, and if both you and I have reefed for a couple of decades, and you want to cycle through stuff. And I don't want to do that. That's why I have 17 reef tanks, and everyone has like different kinds of corals in it. But I feel like, you only have 4 tanks, so you just have to like kind of pick and choose at any given time. But tell me a little bit more what you were describing about your mini reboots of your current tank, which is what, 6-8 months old, maybe?
Yeah, so I was sharing him some video and pictures, which I also uploaded a recent video on my. I don't have a YouTube channel, but just affiliated with my Google identity, and I'm sure you've seen me comment on some of the reef therapy comments, so you could backtrack to if you want to see those videos. But I shared those with Keith as well, and I was just laughing while watching some of that because I set up this tank, this new tank. Well, it's not new, but a year ago, and but then I kept finding what I like, oh, the negative aqua NSA Aquascape, right? And then I hated that, and I hacked that back, and there were just a couple of moments along that last year where I didn't like something, so I hacked it back. Then I removed a huge leather coral that made me have to re-aquascape and cut things back. So it looks like I set up the tank a month ago, and it's been running for a year. And so I was just sharing that with him of like, yeah, it looks, there's not much growth there, and now to your point, and almost hypocritical to what I just said, I was telling you, part of me thinks this tank I have in the basement, which I jokingly refer to as the angel free zone, because that's where I keep the corals that I don't trust around my angelfish. I could put all of these big softies in there, and then put more acros in the upstairs tank. But I don't know. It's like you work so hard to grow these acros out, and then what? I almost like LPS corals a lot. Like softies are easy to hack back. They're weeds, right? And then LPS are fun because they just grow slow. I've never had to prune my blastomusa, right? It's just it just grows a little bit bigger and gets a little prettier, and candy cane corals I've had to hack back, and hammer corals, branching hammers, but I don't know. It's just sort of into the topic we want to talk about tonight, but I just find a variety of corals that are different shapes and morphologies more interesting than a bunch of colorful sticks. It was cool when we were still trying to figure acros out, and I know they're not fully figured out. They're still a pain in the butt, but back when it felt like a science project and you were getting into some uncharted territories, and then some crazy guy in the Solomons starts shipping these crazy corals, and then the ORA frags came out, and it was this fun adventure. And now, I don't know, I don't see a lot of variety in Acropora. I do see a variety in color, but not in species anymore. And it's not, for anyone struggling with SPS, please don't take this as an arrogant comment, but they're not that hard anymore. They're not this orchid of the way orchids are to plants, right? I always struggled to keep orchids alive. They were mysterious to me, but SPS, they just grow, they just do their thing. I don't know how to put it.
I feel you there with the acros, being more demanding. They take up so much more minerals, and without them, your dosing regimen is so much smaller. I'm looking at, dosing over 200 mLs of buffer daily on 2 of my tanks, right? So that's just a buffer, and the calcium is right up there, magnesium similarly. But the tanks are doing really well. But on that note, on one of my tanks, my orange passion tenuous just crapped out out of nowhere. We haven't done anything to the tank out of the ordinary, just siphon out some detritus, do a little dosing, and just one day I look in there, there was a coral that people would point out, when the few visitors that came to the studio would see it. And I'm just like scratching my head. I'm like, how did you go from being like the shining acro in this tank, and it was like right around the corner from being a small colony, to now it's like basically a skeleton with a few live branches at the base? Thankfully that's an isolated occurrence, but yeah, I feel you on the heavier toll and more demanding acros, because even if they're doing well, hopefully they're doing well, you got to feed them all that calcium and carbonate and magnesium and whatever else it takes to make them happy. So yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I understand. You just need to find the right acro that are really like turn you on. I think when you see the Hoaxamai again, you'll be like, oh yeah, I need some neon blue branching staghorn in my life.
Yeah, I mean,
And with my
last
videos in the
summer.
past,
Yeah, go ahead. What were you
with my
saying?
videos in the past showing how you can graft the good part back onto the stump, you don't have to completely start over.
That's true. And when I was there last summer, walking around, your large shallow displays, I don't know what you call them, your grow out systems or what.
Tables.
Yeah. It definitely, I definitely felt that spark again, especially seeing the Hoaxamai. You had what looked like a Abrolocensis or Hensis, I forget. But just some wouldn't call them classic corals, but just corals that I don't see online as much. And it made me think that maybe part of my disinterest is also just what I'm seeing online with SBS versus some of those old school stags. And then you had some good, big reef crest corals, the gemniferas and that humulus, like that. Seeing those again, I was like, oh yeah, those are cool, but yeah, it's just funny, there's so many corals I haven't kept in so long. And we said this in a podcast in the past, that how sometimes you just pass go and you don't keep certain things. Like you and I've never kept a what is the big wrasse?
Australian tusk.
Yes, thank you, Harlequin or Australian. And there's just, there was that thought of, man, I haven't kept a trachea since 20 years ago, and that kind of stuff got me thinking about keeping some of those
I
types of
have,
corals.
but like even my best trachea, get it to 5 years and something will happen. And so it's just like I see tracheas, I'm just like, man, you're a cut flower. And it's not really fair to say, because over 5 years, you can get a lot of enjoyment, but I mean, you see a lot of reef tanks. You see a lot of old reef tanks who's got old tracheas that they're sharing and propagating. It's just not the same. At least with the acros, you can spread them out and have that strain for a very long time, right? A trachea doesn't survive super long term the way a bubble coral does, the way an elegance coral does, or fox, or any of these colonial species. And so yeah, I feel you on there. Trachea is actually one of the few common corals I don't have here in the studio.
Really?
Now that I say that, I'm like, you know what? I should just pull the trigger and just grab a couple of token pieces here and there, and none of these $500 normal colored corals. But I feel like cinerinas are such a better investment, because you really have to try to lose a cinerina. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, when you brought up that tenuous that crapped out on you, but when you just have that mysterious crap out happen, you have the option with SPS to have a frag in another system or something to just re-kickstart that colony and go, I wonder what happened. Whereas when a trachea dies on you, you're SOL. It's not like you can spread that one out.
I have one.
Go ahead.
I have one frag of orange passion in another tank, but the one that crapped out, he just looked exactly like the picture. You know what I mean? Just nice multicolor, kind of orangish polyps. And it's always perplexing when a coral surrounded by related corals just craps out, right? Kind of like my amazeballs that was surrounded by other Ghanies just decided, I'm not going to, nope. But yeah, it's just like I'm looking at this orange passion tenuous, and blue millie next to it, and some spathula to the other side, and a couple other random acro frags, and they show nothing. And then just this one random orange passion that's just been chilling in the same spot for maybe like a year and a half, almost 2 years. Just said, okay, I'm clocking out now, and that's just to be expected. It's weird and it's startling, and it makes you think, oh, maybe things are wrong. But when everything else is like thriving and growing, it's just like not that much you can do. But on that note, I feel we can kind of start segueing in some of the things we love in the world of coral reefing. And I know we already did one session on kind of what we love about the Reef Aquarium hobby.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of overlap, but I'm hoping that this session will be more of a part 2, just to kind of keep it upbeat. And, this kind of comes from out of a lot of the responses out of the Radion, right? We talked about it last week. And people just don't realize how good we have it. We covered it really well in our previous session of just like, there's just no comparison between like an entry level or mid-grade LED today and like the most high-end sort of controllable metal halides that we had just 10, 12, 15 years ago. They're not even in the same universe, right? As far as like their impact on the aquarium hobby. And so, I just want to talk about some things that I love that are just, you'd have to be there when these developments came on to really appreciate where we are at now.
Yeah, I feel that some of the stuff that's really great is taken for granted. Sorry, long day. Because you had to have lived through some of the more DIY era of reef keeping to go, man, it is really great that we have some. And then other parts of it is just stuff that I think you just take for granted over time because you're used to it. And then someone who is an outsider can come in and say, and, appreciate that aspect of your reef tank because you're used to it, but they're not, you live in Colorado. When I moved to Boulder to go to college, I remember sitting at the little bus. They have these little small buses that take you to campus and looking at the foothills, the Flatirons, and just being like, wow, every day. And then, 6 months later, you're not even staring at him anymore. They're there,
Yep.
You take them for granted. And I definitely think there's that aspect in the hobby too, sometimes where you get used to the fact that there's not a coral reef, but a reef-like mini habitat in a glass box, existing in your house, and then your neighbor drops by for, a tool or something they need to borrow and they're like, holy crap. And then you're like, oh yeah, it is pretty cool. Yeah, it is pretty wild.
What is the science experiment that you have here? Is that real?
Yeah. Are those things alive? Are those rocks alive?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Then you have a little moment of pride and enjoyment for something that you've created,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to start off super simple and say I am so thankful for super glue.
Yeah.
Just super glue itself. Do you know how hard it would be to propagate corals without it? Right? Like Steve Chang back in the day before Garf popularized using super glue in a reef in a saltwater environment, we were, you'd frag a coral and then you have to mix up some epoxy and build this whole little collar around it that would obviously shrink because it was like not today's epoxy, and just hope that it held onto the coral enough that eventually it would, cure, it would encrust, and there was always a little bit of dieback from the old school epoxy from the chemical reaction or whatever. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
the dieback. And so just the way we can pump corals onto another surface using this magical gel. Oh my God, dude, this hobby would suck without it. Someone would have to invent it. Someone would have to figure out, imagine if super glue was just somehow randomly toxic in saltwater environment or just simply did not cure around water. Like we'd be screwed. We'd be totally screwed. This hobby would just be radically different. And we haven't always had super glue at our disposal, right? I think it was late 90s. It was, I think, first introduced in 95, 96, 97, Marine Fish Monthly, GARF, Geothermal Aquaculture Research Foundation. They're like, hey, we just take super glue and glue stuff, glue corals to things. And everybody's like, what? So we take this for granted. Now, but not only do we have super glue, we have super glue gel.
Yeah,
and this is a special version of cyanoacrylate.
That was,
and I remember a day when we didn't have that. And it's just one of those things that makes the hobby almost possible, right? If we had to, I don't know, if you had to get a coral to encrust onto another thing without being able to just hack and glue it onto something. Oh my God, coral frags, there'd just be like 10% of the frags that throw out there, or much, much less. And casual aquarists would just not be doing it. So I'm super thankful for super glue.
I think you sent me home with my first super glue attempt, and it was the Bob Mankin corals you guys had gotten a shipment in, and you sent me home with a frag and an actual
1999.
tube of super glue. And up, but until that point, I was just using the 2-part epoxy. And then what was interesting about that is then, my Google brain started going and reading up on it and learning that it was actually invented as a liquid suture during, I believe, World War II, which then that totally revolutionized my camping game. So I remember even in the early 2000s going camping with my buddies, and you get a cut on your finger and it's like, forget Band-Aids, man, just put some super glue on it. And that was before liquid bandages and all that was popularized, and everyone thought, because it smells so toxic, or chemically pungent, so the idea of putting that into your bloodstream seemed like a really bad idea. But yeah, it was that is a miracle product all the way around. So, and the gel, to
And
your
that,
point,
kids, is why it's important to learn your history, right?
Right.
Because if you didn't know that super glue was developed as a suture, you wouldn't know that it's like just completely non-toxic. It doesn't, flow into anything. It just stays into its own clump. So yeah, I know that's a little obvious one, a little easy one, but I know some of the older timers listening or watching will appreciate that. I am so thankful for propeller pumps.
Yeah.
I, developed a whole gyre flow concept because we were only using power heads. We only had jets, and I was trying to figure out a way to make all the water move at once. And at the time, I was going to school for marine science, and it just, was taking these courses in oceanography and learned about gyres. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I can call it gyre flow. And it sounded so dumb. It sounded so dumb for a long time to use gyre as a word, but now it's like, common in the Reef Aquarium vocabulary, basically. But now that we have propeller pumps, people don't even have to think about creating true gyre flow and moving all the water in their tanks instead of creating little jets that shoot at whatever coral you want to use, or, using a wavy seas or a sea swirl to, move the flow back and forth, right? So now that we have propeller pumps, it's a non-issue. Getting good flow in smaller tanks is just a non-starter. You add, any kind of propeller pump, even the cheapest one, doesn't have to have any features, doesn't need to be controllable, right? You can kind of adjust its performance based on its placement and the direction that it's moving. But man, I know you were there when the first Little Giant pump kits came out, where you could modify a Little Giant, submersible pond pump and add this propeller to it, put it into an acrylic case and hang it off the side of your tank. It cost as much as the pump itself. And then it was just like shortly after the Toonsy Streams came out, and it just totally revolutionized how we move water. And, now we have our Vortex and our Sea Chays and our Neros. And now I got my hands on an Abyss flow cannon, $2,000 machine that will practically propel a boat around. And I'm like, man, this is incredible. It's astounding how far we've come, what we used to put up with. And you got people complaining that, oh my God, this light's been refreshed, 2.5, 3 years after it first came out. I'm like, oh my God, could you imagine trying to DIY every part of what we're trying to do right now? The hobby would be a fraction of as big as it is now, which means much fewer corals, which means also much more affordable coral because there's so many people that want them.
Yeah, I remember the MaxiJet kits. Your propeller point was great because what did we had? We had MaxiJet pumps. We had some people spent money on the Toonsies that were power heads where the motor was above the water. I remember some Chinese knockoffs of those, but it was the propeller game.
The top-mounted pump where the motor was on the outside, and the best version you could get had 2 outlets, right? So it was one spindle that came down, and you can actually rotate the outlets different direction, and it would spin 2 impellers at the same time. Damn, I need to find one of those and add it to the museum because, God, I haven't seen one of those in forever. It's got to be wasting away in a warehouse somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
But yeah, it was
that was huge. And then yeah, it was the Tunzi streams were the first ones, right? Those
yeah.
big little cube looking things. I think I still have those somewhere.
And they were big. Like you said, they were really big honkers,
Yeah.
and they moved a decent amount of flow, but nothing like what we have today. Forget controllability, right? You're just happy to have the propeller go inside the tank, and you didn't have to build the kit yourself. But yeah, that was just like revolutionary.
For me,
I guess we could probably.
Yeah, what were you saying?
I was saying we could probably retitle this session, things we're thankful for in the aquarium hobby, because we already had the one of the things we love, and these are the things I'm thankful for.
One of mine started with, I was going to say DC pumps, but then that got me more thinking bigger on the scale of just how much quieter reef tanks have become overall because of a multitude of factors.
My God.
One, our lighting doesn't need to be actively cooled with crazy CFM fans, right? The way halides were. Two, we went from AC pumps to DC pumps for a lot of applications. The Durso overflow was loud. I mean, yeah, it reduced bubbles in your sump. That reduced some noise, but Dursos were still loud compared to continuous siphon overflows.
That's a good one. So I just want, like, even if you've been reefing for like 10 or 12 years, right? You just have to transport yourself back to a time when we didn't have continuous siphon overflow. We didn't have bean animals. We, we're just trying to reduce like the gurgling a little bit. And the Stockman mod and the Dursa overflow was something that came out of Reef Central that reduced it somewhat, but it still had that gurgle in your sump. And it's funny because I had the efficiency of LED lighting and DC pumps as one of the things I'm thankful for. But you're right, the noise.
Yeah.
Like even the quietest Iwaki plus whatever pumps you had running and your skimmer, hissing and puffing, and even like the hum of your metal halide ballasts, all that together, man. A 15, 20-year-old reef tank, you stood next to it, you knew you were standing next to something was going on. And I can go next to my reef tanks now. I don't even know that there's anything there.
Yeah.
Some of them can be so quiet and silent. You're just like, unless you put your cheekbone and your jawbone next to the glass and hear the vibration, they can be so silent. It used to be a real sticking point between spouses, is how loud the reef tank would be.
Yeah, my wife was used to it. We lived in an apartment with all of that loud noise. And then we lived in a house where I didn't have a basement. And when we bought this house 13 years ago, I remember seeing the room where I would put my tank. And I remember seeing that there was an unfinished space below it. And I was thinking, okay, I'd already gone to a passively cooled Aquametic metal halide fixture, so no more fans, right? But the next evolution was, if we buy this house, I can put my sump in the basement and then just have a big AC pump, a blue line to pump it back up a story. And that way all the noise will be in the basement. And I was so excited about the noise reduction. And then the technology has improved so vastly that when it came to putting a tank back upstairs, when I replaced that with a 225-gallon tank, I put the sump back in the stand, because for me, the electrical savings of not having a massive pump my water back up a story was worth it. And I knew that I could have a quiet tank, right? I knew I could have everything inside that stand and have it be quiet again. And so it wasn't worth like having this massive sump in the basement. But it's just crazy that moving into this house, that was the factor. It was like, I can move my sump to a part of the house where nobody has to listen to it. And then it didn't matter in the end anymore. So that to me was something that I was really thankful for. And that, that's a multifaceted thing, right? That's your DC pumps. That is the lack of needing loud fans. And yeah, so, and whoever can, I don't know if
along those same lines, I had.
Was that? Oh no, I was going to say, I don't know if it was Herbie or Bean that came first, but thank you to both of them. So
Yeah, I mean, along those same lines, just the efficiency of DC powered equipment. These days you can add a 4 to 6 foot tank to your electricity bill and only see like a $10 to $20 a month increase. Whereas there was a time where you didn't have to just factor in the cost of your chemicals and your salt mix and whatever animals you were going to add to your reef tank, but you could be into it for $50 to $100 to $200 a month if you're running a ton of halides plus a chiller. Right?
yeah,
We have it so good now. It's just incredible. If I had to use like classic equipment at the studio, I would have a quarter of the tanks. I would have just done like 4 big tanks and been done with it, and all that improvement in the technology has enabled nano aquariums, right? One of the reasons we didn't do nano aquariums is because, you're still looking at 100 to 200 watts of fluorescent lighting, or, really hot, like 75-watt micro metal halide lamp. And that was your only options, or power compacts, which was also very hot and expensive. But yeah, the efficiency of DC equipment, and I guess you could say, LEDs are also DC. The only thing that's not DC is your heater, right? That's still AC. But it's just a radical improvement in the technology, and it's just led to just much lower operating cost and much lower noise level and much better spouse approval factor.
yeah,
That's a really big one. I'm glad you mentioned that one.
yeah. That's
So another one that I had is the high clarity glass. There was a time when Oceanic was promoting some of their low iron glass, but it wasn't as high clarity as it is today. But there was, if you were to use a tank from 10 to 20 years ago, they were dark. There was a layer there. You could definitely see it, even when your glass was super clean and your water was super clear. And it's just when your glass is clean today, inside and out, and your water's clear, it just looks like your corals and your fish are just floating in midair. It's really striking. And it's one of those things you don't really see in pictures, but in person, you're just like, whoa. I know how you feel about that, softer, low iron glass. I think all of the reef therapy patients are familiar with it as well.
I don't need to repeat myself.
And it's a fair one. But, I got a little stack of like UNS rimless glass aquariums right here. And now, even mid-grade tanks are coming with that high clarity glass. And I feel like it's something you can take for granted super easily, because if you haven't dealt with old school high iron, very hard to scratch aquariums, it really adds to the overall presentation of the aquarium. There's not much more to say about it other than I like it.
Well, and there's the showcase factor, I think, because the tanks that we had at our disposal, without going custom, I would say the nicest looking aquariums were Oceanics, and even their stands were nothing to shout home about. The tanks had a plastic trim. It's just, to me, it's amazing how attractive aquariums have become, but also the whole concept of out-of-the-box reef keeping. I mean, the lack, I mentioned earlier, the DIY era. There's just no need. There's no need to do that. And I know we've talked about that in the past, but it is just amazing, because you used to be this, if you're a reef keeper, you were building, it was like the guy who built the rocket ship on the farm. What movie was that? Where it was like you're building a reef tank with equipment, with tanks, and made by tank manufacturers who only cared about the freshwater side of the hobby. Reef ready was about as far as they went. Putting an overflow box in the tank, and now these tanks are gorgeous, man. It's sometimes I get excited about the prospect of a new tank and its new dimensions that I want to set one up, but then I have no idea what I would do with it. But the tank itself makes me want to set up a reef, whereas usually the tank itself was like the worst part of it. It was like, no, 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 don't look at all that. Look inside the tank, you know? So, kudos to that.
Yeah,
Just
no,
the
we
availability.
used to have to figure out so much of this. You pick out your tank, you pick out your stand, your hang on the back overflow box with the U tubes, and then your plumbing. And yeah, you're right. The whole nearly almost plug and play experience, because in most climates you still need a heater, and so
Yeah.
I still kind of bristle when manufacturers said an all-in-one aquarium has everything that they need, but it doesn't have a real top off, and it doesn't have like a lid or something to keep the fish from jumping out, and it almost never includes a heater. But besides those couple things, this is an age that is unique to these times when you really had to piece everything together, and you had to ask about a specific sump and a specific stand and how to get the water down and how to get the water back. And especially for newcomers to the aquarium hobby, grabbing an all-in-one tank or a real reef-ready aquarium with all the plumbing, the Cade comes to mind as an exemplary example of just everything is pre-cut, auto top-off float valve that you can plug into something else. Water box and Red Sea are right there with them. It's just, you really take that for granted, how much mental bandwidth we used to have to spend on every single detail, right?
Well,
and just going back to that high clarity glass, that used to be an option.
yeah.
Right now, you kind of have to ask, like you did, to not have high clarity glass. Like I'm wondering if your tank is basically made out of bottoms, right? Where they just had like this high iron glass only used for the bottom of the aquarium. They're like, this guy wants a low clarity glass tank. All right, I guess we're gonna just take all these panes that were earmarked for the bottom of the aquarium, and we're gonna build the whole thing with it. Well, customer's always right. We'll just do what he wants.
I was worried they were going to send high clarity glass anyway and just not charge me, because it just would be easier for them, because they probably had all that glass pre-cut, templates and all that. But the other funny thing about tanks back then was, today we always advocate, get an 18-inch wide tank or 24-inch wide, and I mean depth front to back tank, because you can do more aquascaping with it than a 12-inch deep tank, So, people would always say, don't get the 55, get the 75, right? But the other reason we used to say that was because a 12-inch wide tank, you could not fit any type of aquarium into the stand to act as a sump, right? Because if the tank's 12 inches and then the stand is usually less wide than the tank, you literally couldn't find something that would fit. And so there was always that advocating of getting an 18-inch wide or 24-inch wide tank so that you could fit a 12-inch wide tank or 18-inch, like a 40 breeder underneath. And that's the kind of crap you used to have to think about. Now you get a sump with the tank, and you're modding it. You're if you don't like there's nothing wrong with it, but you're gonna, I modded mine, right? So that's just something that I'm thankful for. It. We said it in the past. The focus now is on the reef keeping, not on the DIY skills, right? So it's a good thing.
No, absolutely. I remember a time where I was starting to get a little bored with the reef aquarium hobby. I had grown out a bunch of different fish and a bunch of different corals, and LEDs seemed like they were on the horizon, and they seemed like a faraway technology. And I will never forget my first entry-level strip of blue LEDs. It was incredible, because for years, these colors that we had looked at that I always called like imaginary colors under blue radiums or blue plus T5s or blue power compacts or actinic VHOs, the colors were there, but they weren't as crisp as even the most average blue LED light. It was like going from pastel to neon. Just absolutely. I still have that strip and I will never let it go because it really reinvigorated me. And I still remember, and I don't think it was about 2011, I had a powwow with the staff at Reef Builders. I'm like, we're going to be writing about LEDs this whole year. And I think if you look at stories from 2011, any given day, we would write 4 to 5 stories, and 3 or more of them would be about a new LED light, right? And so you just, in my 3 previous videos, I'm like dissecting one fixture for its different merits and violets and ultraviolet lights and more of the blue and more of the royal blue. We didn't even have that vocabulary, right? But the first shitty blue LED light that I threw over a tank, I was like, oh my God. After like 10 to 15 years of looking at colorful but more pastel looking corals, when you finally see those corals, those colors in the corals just turned up, just turned. It was just astounding, right? The best VHO T5 halide just doesn't quite have the crispness and that saturation, that pure fluorescence excitation of even the most average LED. Right, you can take an off-brand, off-bin LED and put it in a fixture, and you're like, oh my God, look at the actual colors. And now we have the leisure of comparing different types of blues, different types of royal blues, and then further on in the indigo and the violet and the ultraviolet. And God, I wish there was some kind of challenge we could put together of like, encouraging newer reefers who are really, really passionate to set up an old school tank with only T5s. Because then when you only have T5s, you're like, okay, I see the colors and they're there and they're kind of nice, but just nothing brings out that fluorescence like the LEDs. You're right. That excitation peak, the emission peak of the LED can perfectly line up with the excitation peak of the pigments in the corals. And it's just one of those things like you'd have to be there to really appreciate how awesome LEDs are. We always thought when LEDs were an idea, we knew that they were efficient. And obviously over the last 12 years, their efficiency has shattered all expectations, but it's the color that you just don't realize how much we're getting these days.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the whole G6 and some of the videos you made on them, and it brought me back to my first LED experience where, unbeknownst to me, I had extremely hot pockets of intensity. And then right next door was no intensity, right? So I had areas that maybe were not enough intensity to get the kind of coloration that I was hoping for. And then right next door, you could see a coral just getting pale. And I had a hell of a time.
Are you talking about the Mazuras?
Yeah, I mean, they were good lights, and I did as much as I could with them. But eventually I had to add... Build My LED, was that what they were called? Those bars? Mm-hmm. And that was me.
Yep.
And I put him on an angle, 45-degree angle, and that was my backfill, right? That was my, what do you call this new light? You've got point source, and then you've got diffuse.
Fill light's pretty good. Secondary light.
And then I started to have more success with them. But then again, that was such experimentation versus now you look at these more diffuse LED fixtures like the G6 and they're getting more idiot proof. There's still too many bars. Like there's a lot to tweak, which is fun for people that know what they're doing. But if you're just getting into this hobby, it might feel a little bit overwhelming. But that said, there's not this whole if you put the coral 2 inches to the left, you're going to burn it. And if you move it 2 inches this direction, it's not going to get enough light. It's just amazing how much within that space, beyond just the phosphorescent glow, the technology has progressed as well, right? Like they're a lot more idiot proof, I think, today than they were. And
That's
halides
an
weren't idiot
excellent
proof either,
point.
right? So, yeah.
That's an excellent point, because I don't think modern reefers who've been paying attention for, I don't know, the last 5 years understand the challenges that we had with the first generations of LEDs, where the manufacturer they were using lenses to really focus as much as that light and capture that light and send it downwards. But I remember plenty of reef tanks that were striped. There was literally an area of very high light under the light, and that's where you'd put your acros, and in between you'd put, your chalices or montes or soft corals or LPS, right? I still remember the first reef tank that I saw that was grown. It was, I think his name's James Chow. I haven't seen him in a long time, but he was in New York. And this is winding back clock like 10 to 12 years. And he had a tank that was grown fully from LEDs, and it was totally striped, right? Acros underneath the light and other corals on the sides. And so that's where this constant, I guess, improvement, you can say, to the uniform homogeneous light field is still coming from. Although I think the Radeon G6 is like, all right, we've reached peak, spread. And, for the next generation, I don't even know what they're going to do for the next generation, right? They've got the spread, they've got the color, they've got the controllability, they've got all the power in one. But yeah, I think there's not too many more gains to be had on the diffusion side of the LED.
Do you remember MaxSpec came out with larger fixtures that had multi-chip LEDs, and then they also had the fill LEDs. This was like a long time ago.
Actually, it wasn't that long ago. This was like 4 or 5 years ago. It was the MaxSpec recurve.
Is that
It
what
was
it was?
basically a razor with built-in. Yeah, it was a razor. It
No.
was a MaxSpec razor.
Yeah, go ahead. I know that light. It was before then even. It was like a multi-chip.
There was other
daylight.
companies that came out with.
It wasn't MaxSpec?
There was other companies that came out with fixtures that had T5s on the side, and they were a great hybrid. And that was a surprising thing. I really thought we would see T5 fixtures with a little bit of LED, and then LED would grow as needed. And it wasn't until like everybody went all in on LED and started missing some of that fill light, because some people don't like the shadows, some people don't like the shimmer, and they want to diffuse that or just soften it with some supplemental lights.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
I think that's what's up.
GHL had the LEDs with the supplemental T5s. I would love to see more of that, but I understand that that's not a great market when you're talking about, building a 12-inch, 24-inch, 36, 48, 72, that gets to be a pain in terms of manufacturing, I imagine. But basically, give me my metal halide with actinic supplementation, but have it all be LED, right? Have something like an A500X as your point source and then supplement it. But that would be cool. I mean, you can build that yourself for, with some light LED light bars and all that. But I want to say MaxSpec tried something like that, but I'll have to Google it. I don't know.
Right along those same lines, I am incredibly thankful for Needlewheel protein skimmers. I remember a day where you just had to put it on your maintenance list to clean out the venturi that was feeding your protein skimmer, because, you had the Aquasea, which are, high speed aeration, Beckett's and ETSs with just used a ton of power, and they were loud, right? Because of the crashing water inside the tubes. But the needle wheels, that was not an obvious thing that was going to happen, right? That was a patent by Deltec and Dutch Aquarium Systems. They had a couple models, and I think the first really widely available one was the Aquamatic Turbo Floater. But all our protein skimmers now are on needle wheel. Very, very few of them are a downdraft style or a Venturi style outside of very specific applications. And like I said, just the technique and the technology to make a needle wheel impeller that wasn't going to tear up the pump, that was not obvious. It wasn't clear that that was the future we were headed for. LEDs, that was kind of clear we're going to go that way because it was very low energy. But the needle wheel pumps, needle wheel skimmers, that just transformed how much a protein skimmer can produce in terms of foam, how easy it is to operate. You got a few straggler manufacturers that rail against needle wheel, but they've never really used them. They think that, the pump and the needle wheel are somehow tied together to the skimmer. I'm just like, yeah, just to add a needle wheel's, pump to your skimmer, you'll be good. You know what I should do now that you mentioned that? I should take a Life Reef protein skimmer and add a needle wheel pump to it. Jeff Turchek is 10 minutes down the road, and that would be so funny. He would hate it. He would hate me forever.
In 2002, he sent me like, I don't know how many pages. Let's just say it was like a 2-page email about why needle wheels suck. Because I guess on one of the forums, I was just commenting about, somebody was asking about a Life Reef skimmer, and I was like, I would look at like a Euro Reef skimmer or something like that. And I appreciated his passion, but 20 years later, I'm probably getting my dates wrong, but I feel like the dust has settled on that topic. Not that I don't love a good Venturi skimmer, but so.
There's a scale and there's an application at which it makes sense to use some of these other technologies, although My Reef Creations has created more and larger protein skimmers using needle wheels than, high-powered motor, fed by a high-powered motor. And man, the foam, the froth that they produce is just, it's hard to touch it. It's hard to touch it. The only thing you can say is that some of those larger motors do not like having a needle wheel impeller. It causes different physics to happen inside the pump. But yeah, there was a time where needle wheel protein skimmers were not necessarily obvious. And now every protein skimmer here in the studio, I think I have 10 protein skimmers running. They're all needle wheel. And it's just, that's a given. That's the standard. And it's going to be really hard to take that to the next level. I can't even think of another technology that could challenge it in the immediate or long-term future.
I will say,
I would love it.
The most consistent skimmer I ever had was Geo, George Weber, back when he was still doing a lot of cool DIY projects and stuff. He made me a needle wheel skimmer. And the skimmer cup had a very narrow volute. Is that the term? And what was great about it is that, and I'm not a skimmer designer guy, so I'm probably getting all this wrong, but all of these wide volutes, they do gunk up pretty easy, right? And then they start to drastically drop in skimmate production. And what was interesting about this thing was it wasn't milky white, but I think because the volute was so narrow that the velocity of air and bubbles going through it almost was not self-cleaning, but it stayed cleaner for longer because it really just shoved all the dirt up over into the cup very quickly. So there wasn't as much opportunity for gunk to build up on the inner walls of that volute. That skimmer just ran forever. And I remember it was running on a Mag 7 with was it a Mazzi? Is that the term? Venturi brand?
The Mazzi Venturi,
Yeah.
the injector to rule them all. I forgot about that one. I forgot about it, but I know that I have a couple. I have a red one and a black one. But yeah, that was like your only point of improvement, even on a Life Reef protein skimmer, right? He had his homemade Venturi thing, but if you wanted to upgrade, you'd add the Mazzi Venturi because it was well designed with fluid dynamics and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another thing that just has made reefing so much easier these days.
Yeah. I
know you have a couple that you want to get to.
Yeah.
So I'll let you pick the next one.
I mean, this one will probably you won't like it, but the scale of automation that's available today and the whole cloud connected side of things, I have so much more peace of mind, leaving my tank unattended for large stretches. And the fact that, knock on wood, I don't even use a fish sitter. You know, like nobody comes and checks on my tanks. I do have friends that I can call if I see something that's gone wrong on the webcam or via the Apex. But even just...
Let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Let me stop you right there because you said on the webcam, see things on the webcam, right? So I have cloud connected pH meters and other sensors, and they inform and instruct what I'm already doing, but nothing is better than that webcam, right? Right. You see some values are off from your Trident or your tester or your whatever, whatever chemistry is happening. Then you fire up your webcam and look at the tank and, double check what's going on, because you can never trust, some of the probes like your salinity meter and some of these newfangled water testers. They're not bulletproof, right?
No.
So your real determination of what's going on in your tank when you're not there is the webcam.
Yeah, but I mean, the ability to, if it detects a leak, turn off certain things and then send you a notification, at which point I could call a friend, right? That's really great. And then I know you prefer to call it automated water exchange, but I'll just call it AWC because that's what everybody knows it. That's so great. I was anti-water change. I'd go a year without a water change, but now I just don't have an excuse. And I love the fact that I can mix up a batch while I'm on a conference call. And then, a few hours later, I just push a button, once it's nice and...
But see, that's the caveat, right?
Yeah.
So the automatic water changes is like a semi-automatic.
Yeah.
Because if you really care about your reef tank, you're not going to do that while you're on vacation.
No,
Have you ever done a water change while you're gone?
No, but what if
you haven't done a water change while you're gone? So it's like semi-automatic.
What if you're clam spawned, right?
What if you had too much kalkwasser, what if you have too much kalkwasser, or what if your clam spawned? Yeah, okay, all right.
Push a button while you're sitting by the pool.
To press a couple buttons.
And then just, keep an eye out on the webcam and, give your fish some much... give them the air, as they say in Total Recall. I don't know. It's pretty nice to have that. Yeah. So
that's also super cool.
I like that stuff. I like the fact that
I'm not against.
I was going to say I can be in a different time zone and just turn my lights on so that I can see on the webcam what the hell's going on, right? Like, that's pretty cool. Just little stuff like that. Again, you take the little.
I'm not against automation.
No, I know. I just like to.
Don't pigeonhole me into being against automation.
Oh, I have a T-shirt from you that says "I am the controller," really, so I just laugh. I know you're not against it in any way,
but you.
Yeah.
But you are the controller. Because you talked about checking out your reef tank on your webcam and double checking that, visually everything is happening. And no, I guess that's cool, for people who are really busy.
No, and I'm with you. I'm with you, right? Because I would never trust a Neptune Trident to dose my reef tank and tell me how much, part A, part B I should add, right? That's getting into a level that I don't trust, right? So I get you on that. So,
but that level of automation would not really be as possible without peristaltic pumps.
Yeah,
that's another one that was non-obvious. I remember if you wanted a peristaltic pump, you had an option of this really chintzy plastic box that always failed, or a refurbished medical unit that could cost upwards of $600 for a single channel. There was that one company a long time ago that was refurbishing medical peristaltic pumps specifically for the aquarium hobby, and they were selling those at $300 to $400 for a single unit. And it was it was kind of a big box, big beige box. And nowadays it's I'm struggling to think of a manufacturer that doesn't have a peristaltic pump on the market, right? Neptune Systems got theirs. Ecotech Marine has theirs. Seachem has one as well. And it's just one of those things we take for granted, but you got tiny ones, you got large ones, you got continuous dosing versions, you got maxi versions for the water changes that a lot of other people use. And they have some quirks, as far as programming and calibrating and keeping that tube, a little bit on the newer side, so it's not all depressed. But some of that automation, especially on the dosing side, oh my goodness, I have no idea what I'd do without them right now. If I didn't have peristaltic pumps, I'd have to have calcium reactors on every single thing, which I have a couple going on. But man, peristaltic dosing is just like a godsend. That is one of those automations that is just priceless to the reef aquarium hobby. You take away peristaltic dosing today, and everybody's reef tank is dramatically different. At least their experiences.
I remember getting the medical pumps off eBay because they were the cheapest options. There was the Vario dosing pump, that banana yellow one from Germany. I couldn't afford that back in the day. I couldn't afford
I have one.
A SpectraPure back then, so I would get those medical ones. And then I did buy a used SpectraPure, and that thing was a godsend. And I remember it fell into a batch of kalkwasser, and I was devastated because I was broke back then. And I called them up, and they were like, "Yeah, just soak it in RODI water for a little bit, and then dry it out, and you'll be fine." And it came back to life, and I used that thing for like another 10 years. But I tried, when I started getting into 2 parts, the cheapest option at the time, I think, was Bulk Reef Supply, had some of those cheaper options, but they had plastic gears inside that would wear out. So yeah, when you want to talk to me about just the massive increase in quality and availability of dosing pumps, there's a reason that my calcium reactor is still on a shelf. In my opinion, 2-part dosing has reached a level of peak existence with these dosing pumps and the variety of 2-part solutions. Now you've got 1-part solutions that, in my humble opinion, for me, a calcium reactor doesn't make sense. And somebody could come and argue to me that, in a heavy SBS tank, it's not cost effective, but we're in a hobby where corals are going for $2,000, $3,000, and people don't even blink when they spend $100 on a 2mm frag. So I never understand the argument of like, well, calcium reactor is way more cost effective, but it's also a pain in the butt to go get my CO2 tank refilled. And I have had a calcium reactor plug on me, and I know now you're using continuous peristaltic pumps to dose versus using a needle valve on the effluent that could clog. I know that there's been some evolutions in the whole implementation, but dosing pumps are, relatively speaking, bomb-proof as long as you keep up on maintenance. So yeah.
Do you remember what dosing used to be like?
Yeah.
So I have a variety of FAMAs right here from the 1990s. And you could get it. I think ESV offered these. They were sealed containers.
Oh, yeah.
And you used an air pump to pump air into a sealed chamber, which would then force out some fluid, right? So you have to use an air pump for your dosing, and then somehow figure out the actual volume that was coming out, plug that into a mechanical appliance timer. Oh my goodness. And those were selling for, $100. Now you can get a single channel Camware dosing pump with wireless capability, connect to your app, tell it exactly how much you want to dose. You can get one of those for as literally as like $60, but that's what dosing used to be. Unless you were doing it manually, once or throughout the week, once a week or throughout the week, you had an air pump that came on a timer that pumped into a vessel that was sealed, and, the fluid would be displaced from the air. And I'm like, I think Life Reef have made some things like that.
Yeah.
And goodness gracious, that was the most, because as the air compressed, it, as the vessel filled up, there was more compression. So the more air you pumped into it, the less dosing that you actually got out of it. I never used one of those. That was a little bit before my time, but it's just fascinating to see what reefers did to get their automatic dosing on. Right. And then this entire conversation, we're talking about things we're thankful for today. I can't imagine what a reef therapy session might be like 10 years from now. right? Are we going to come out with some new, spools of OLED fabric that you just somehow just put on the top of your tank, you plug them in, and it's just completely diffused light across end to end, right? Like the background. Like I've been daydreaming about this future aquarium setup basically all my life. And I'm thinking in the future, you might cut a sheet of OLED to put over your tank the same way we used to put a background on the back. Mm-hmm. Right? You just cut it to size, plug it in. And that doesn't seem like it's on the horizon because no one's working on that. Although we're seeing a lot more like display panels for our phones, monitors, and TVs go to micro LED, which are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I imagine one day we'll just be able to cut that to size, plug in a couple wires, and the whole tank's lit up. Probably no shimmer though. Probably no shimmer with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole internet cloud connectivity has, I think, in a sense, been a game changer as well, right? It's changed how we control our lights, how we program them. You just talked about dosers. We used to calibrate them with a timer, a lamp timer, and be like, oh, do I run it for 10 seconds or do I run it for a minute? And you'd use that to calibrate how much it dosed. And now you calibrate it in an app, and now I can just say, hey, dose an extra. If my alk went down, I can correct it a bit with the app. So just that alone, just how we interact with our aquarium equipment has completely changed, and it's opened so many doors. Dosing pumps wouldn't be where they were without it, right? So
one thing I want everybody to realize, like every new cutting, bleeding edge piece of technology, 5-10 years down the road, that's going to be standard issue, right? Just having these multi-channel, controllable, wireless, cloud connected apps for your pumps, your dosers, your lights. That's going to be so standard. We might see those in the all-in-one tanks where they actually offer, the heater and the glass top as well as the dosing pumps or whatever you need to absolutely become plug and play. That's super exciting.
I not to be a Debbie Downer because I love my Neptune Apex, but I think there'll be a point where you can't charge $500-$600 for a controller anymore, right? Because the only thing that controller offers you is a single pane of glass. But now $20 light bulbs come with iPhone apps, right? To control and program them, right? I put in these LED light strips to put under my daughter's bed because she wanted her room to glow. $30, right? Now my Seche pump has an app, right? So when everything comes with an app, how do you charge $600, right? I mean, there's definitely the automation and the integration of if you have everything in a single pane of glass, then this event from this thing can impact a decision on this piece of hardware, right? And so, but is that worth $600 a few years from now? I don't think so.
No, you're totally right. I was at the hardware store yesterday grabbing a few things I need to install some new lights. And I saw a plug that had a switch on it, right? It was just a plug with a mechanical switch on it. It was like $6.99. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm kind of laughing because I've been using the Moras plugs. Yeah. And I get them 4 for $20. Maybe it's like 4 for $22 now with, all the increase in prices of stuff. And I get those for $5 with wireless control, radio, and there's a button on it to turn into a switch. So I have a couple Moras plugs that I use simply as a switch. They're not even programmed. They're $5. How the hell is that cheaper than the hardware switch at Home Depot for $7? It's incredible how far we've come. And man, I'm like struggling to think. We talked about lighting, flow, skimmers, dosing. I think, the water testers probably have a lot of room for improvement, some real actual technology, because right now the status quo is providing these little pieces of equipment and devices that function like a robot. Right? It just tests your water for you the same way that we did for decades before. But, you know, for those of you that will recall the now defunct Mindstream, which had chemically sensitive, they called them foils. You know, the CCAM Ammo Alert has been around for a long time, right? The Ammo Alert just a piece of material that's sensitive to ammonia and changes color with it, and you can look at it and it'll tell you what your ammonia level is, you know, whether they're safe or harmful or toxic or danger. And imagine applying that to your calcium, your magnesium, your alkalinity, your pH, and then having that be read with the sensors that, you know, that's what Mindstream was trying to do. Although the company went defunct, the technology still exists, right? Any company, because they didn't make the foils, first of all.
Yeah.
A lot of people might not know this. They source those from, I think, the medical field. And so any company could find out where they're coming from and put in the R&D to read those things, and they need to be replaced, you know, periodically. And so when you were saying about the controller costing $600, I'm like, you're totally right. These companies are going to have to figure out a more care rig style, you know, of getting their money back. But like, you know, so for some of our international listeners, K-Rig was one of the first companies to make those kind of ready-made coffee machines. You pop in a pot, press a button, it makes the coffee. And it was the razors and razor blades model, right? So if there's a way for a controller to, you know, cost, I mean, realistically, $200 to $300, and they find a way to generate that recurring revenue, that's a much better business model that more and more companies are leaning towards. And so for me, I feel like that's the next real breakthrough. Someone coming out with a Mindstream equivalent where you put in this disc that into your machine or whatever, some kind of cartridge, and you know, once a month or a few times a year you replace that. It's going to measure your chemistry every 15 minutes without using up reagents. That technology still exists. Someone just has to do the heavy lifting of, you know, putting into a consumer facing device.
Yeah, like I see these maintenance kits for some of these auto testers, and you can either do the maintenance yourself and order the kit, or you can send your unit off and then they send you a unit that the maintenance has already been performed upon. But to your point, if you can make the thing, which I know it's not this simple, but you know, because there's a little peristaltic pump inside of it, there's tubing that can clog, but if there's a way to make that hot swappable, right? So you don't, and then that gets shipped back in service, but the unit still stays put, although I guess what's left in there at that point. But there's something to be said for that. But there's also the whole IFTT, if then this, or IFTTT, I forget, if this, then that, you know, and some of the home automation stuff is reaching points of some level of standardization. So if you're a Chemours or you know, one of these companies on the outside of these reef automation products, why not just make your stuff compatible, you know, with Google, with HomeKit, with smart things, and let people then start to build out their own automations. You can't keep that all in a walled-in garden forever is the other piece of it, right? And how much money are you going to spend to make 6 apps into one? You know, like you're a good example of that. You don't mind opening up different apps for different tools. Now, if you can somehow...
I have a folder of apps with 3 pages in the folder. I have muscle memory that will direct me to whichever app I'm going to. Yeah, I do not mind opening multiple apps. This is very much a white people problem, of first world problem. Be like, oh, it's in a different app. It's going to take so much time to navigate to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge HomeKit guy just because I don't trust Alexa or Google. But, you know, HomeKit is really behind compared to Google and Alexa in terms of home automation and support for different products, partly because they just have high security standards. But so I just gave up and I just said, okay, fine, I'll just use the app that came with whatever product, you know? I mean, so, But yeah, that's a good point. Making the razor blade kind of thing, making it so that because that's the thing that scares me about those auto testers is a lot can go wrong with them. Like I feel like that's just yet another thing I have to maintain. But if the maintenance is outsourced, okay, yeah, that might be interesting. Especially for things like alkalinity. I mean, the other crap I don't care about. What are you gonna say, sir?
I take our water testing very seriously here at the studio. We have invested a lot of energy and effort to really making sure we're using our HANA checkers correctly with proper volumes, backed up by scales, and the scales are backed up by reference weights. And oh my God, I cannot wait till that magnesium comes out. Because, I think salifert magnesium is the last just kind of old school kit that we're still using for measuring certain things. So we use HANA for alkalinity, calcium, nitrate, phosphate, and magnesium is the last kind of like really analog one. It still gives us really accurate results. It's just going to be really nice when all those are combined. And then the marine tester that can just do whatever tests you want to do at a single time and then log those intelligently into a way that makes sense. And oh man, I'm excited. But yeah, I think we have a lot to be thankful for in the Reef Aquarium hobby as far as the progress. I know that some of the newer patients in our sessions for reef therapy, we sound a lot like, old guys talking about the good old days. But, as far as equipment goes, there has never been a better time to be a reef hobbyist than right now. Right? I don't think anyone wants to wind back the clock to Iwakis and halides and air pump dosing. And, if you have higher demands, a required obligatory calcium reactor, right? And that's everything about today's scene on the Reef Aquarium hobby has made it more accessible, more precise, and more accurate. Like it's just a real pleasant time to be a Reef Aquarium hobbyist. And so, I know we like to yell at the clouds a little bit, but this is one that was nice to kind of follow up on things we love about the aquarium hobby and talk about the things that we're thankful for as far as like the progress of the equipment. I think we just finally got a really big development on the heater space. So in Innovative Marine, they tried to launch a proportional temperature coefficient style heater. It's called PTC heater, where the current that's being fed into the heating element is proportional to some, ideas or some internal circuitry. But these new PTC heaters from Shago don't require a specific kind of controller, and they're just proportional heating like a fan, right? Like the fan in our LEDs, they're running at a specific speed proportional to the heat that needs to be blown off.
On off,
so
on
these
off,
PTC
on off, on
style
off.
heaters.
Is that what you're saying? It's like more continually on to different intensity. Excuse me.
I believe so. These are so new that I don't know for sure. But one thing I do know for sure is that the technology means that the moment that they're exposed to air, if you're doing a water change or pull them out of the water for some reason, they just turn off. They just straight turn off. So we're finally getting some big improvements on the heater side. And hopefully that also translates into more reliable heaters down the road.
That would be great for us controller people, man, because the one thing that burns out your controller is the heater turning on and off too frequently, right? So
you want to tell us more about that energy bar that had the crummy power supply that you had to replace?
No, I've moaned about that one enough, but I'm just saying, it's because I would rather use the temperature thermometer built into my controller, but there is that general consensus that if you have an Apex, put an Inkbird or something in between that does the actuation of and then set a wider temperature range. I forget the thing inside the that actuates the power to the outlet. I forget the term for it, but that's what
thermostatic switch.
No, I don't know. It'll come to me like 5 seconds after we conclude this podcast, but the listeners will know what I'm talking about. But that there is a general recommendation of don't have your controller turn the heater on and off, which is why I still use Eheim Ebo Yager heaters, and I use the thermostat inside the heater, and then the controller is sort of the override if the heater, starts to go nuts. But what you're telling me about these new heaters sounds good. So.
Yeah, no, that's one thing that general, controllers are really, really good for, is that layer of redundancy. But man, it's been a fun session of reef therapy, just, talking about everything that's great in the reef aquarium hobby. We focused a little bit more on the equipment. There's things about the livestock that I think we've kind of covered in the past, but I know we just had Memorial Day, and that means a lot of kids are out of school, and a lot of people are planning their vacations and planning to spend time away from their tanks. And this is a great time to remind you guys that we did a whole session talking about how to put your tank on cruise control, and lots of tips and tricks to just make sure you're really comfortable when you leave, that everything about your reef tank will be great. So if you haven't heard that one or watched that one before, make sure to check it out on your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube. It's literally how to make your tank coast. It wasn't that long ago, but I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you're listening on podcast form, make sure to rate us on your favorite podcatcher so we can rise up in the ranks. And if you have any comments for us, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to share those down below, and we'll catch you guys on another session very soon. Thanks for joining me, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. And tomorrow night I'll be on with Keith on Reef Bum, so ask lots of questions for that as well. I don't know when this will post. Maybe it'll post after the fact.
Yeah, two things. By the time you're listening to this, probably Mark will have been on Reef Bum, and you'll get Mark Vanderwall without Jake Adams talking to Keith Berkelhammer. And I'm actually fascinated. I cannot wait to listen to it. It'll just be so nice to be in the background, just kind of seeing what Mark has to say. I'm sure I'll throw down in super chat and try to promote that live stream when it's going on. But also, I just scheduled a premiere tomorrow specifically around your live stream. So it's going to be 2 hours before at 3 p.m. When this comes out, it'll probably be too late, but go back and check out the video on the Reef Builders channel of Juan Gabriel Grajales reef tank. It's probably the best reef tank in Mexico, and it's got a lot going for it. You don't want to miss it, because even though I think I know everything, I'm always double checking, and it was really nice to visit this guy who's using the Triton method and a lot of high-tech equipment to just grow some of the best acros. Go to Reef Builders. By the time you're listening to this, I'm sure that video will be up, and it's just such a fascinating reef with lots of awesome close-up of his coral. So until next time, we'll catch you guys on the next session of Reef Therapy.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, Mark.
Bye.